Hey everybody, welcome to my top 10 roller coasters as of April 2018. I'm just kind of making this so you get a bit of an idea of where I stand roller coaster wise if you really want to know if you're that much of an enthusiast, and because it's maybe a bit relevant because I make a lot of videos about theme parks, but I rarely actually talk about my real life experiences with these. Now, I'm not putting this on my main channel or anything because this is just a top 10 at the moment, and I want to actually get into the real top 10 once I ride some of my huge bucket list roller coasters like Wildfire and Helix, and hopefully also Hyperion later this year. Update my top 10 by then and get it out on my channel. So for now, here's my top 10 of roller coasters, and before I get into the first one, I just want to say that my top 10 is mostly based on fun factor. How much fun did I have on a roller coaster? I don't really like to get into crazy details like I'm giving the environment this much score, or I'm giving the airtime this much score versus the positive G-forces. I just kind of feel like, you know, how much fun did I have on a roller coaster? Was it more fun than I had on this one? Then yeah, let's place it above that one. So it's mostly just a sort of relative fun factor versus each coaster. Yeah, okay, understood? Okay, awesome. So my number 10 is Olympia Looping, partly because I kind of feel like I should have a Schwarzkopf coaster in my top 10, but it's inevitably gonna be kicked out by something. But at least for now, I feel like it's better than anything that I have put below it, which I don't rank. But Olympia Looping has just that unique factor that for now keeps it in a top 10 for me, which is that awesome Schwarzkopfiness. For one, I just love the shaping of Schwarzkopfs. It never really makes it a masterpiece for me, but it's just, I personally really like it. The sort of heart lining that's not actually heart lined, you can really feel that it's a human effort. Whereas with a lot of coasters nowadays, you can tell that it's been generated by computers. There's mathematical equations behind the actual shaping of the elements. And while obviously Olympia Looping has also a lot of mathematics, etc. behind it, it doesn't quite so much feel like it's made in FED++. It's really just sort of gimmicky, not entirely correct heart lining, but it's smooth anyway, for especially how old that ride is. It's super smooth. And the star of the ride is just those loopings, those 5 different vertical loops consecutively, which are absolutely awesome. I just really love the circular loop feeling over the teardrop shape loop feeling. Sorry, I have a cold. Because those teardrop shapes loops are like, you can't really tell that you're in a loop because the forces are the same the entire way around. I'm not a big fan of Vekoma or Arrow loops, but Olympia Looping just has those perfect, awesome, almost circular loops with crazy high G-forces at the bottoms exceeding 5 Gs, and then the almost hang time at the top of the loop where you can really tell that you're going upside down, and I'm just a huge fan of those things. Especially the first drop into that first looping is so forceful and awesome. So yeah, for me that's a deserved number 10. Also, it is awesome to look at with that whole Olympic loop kind of setup, and it definitely makes the atmosphere of a fairground that it's standing at, I think. So number 9 is Takabisha, which is probably my favorite Gerstlauer trek-wise. I'm not entirely sure whether it's my favorite Gerstlauer overall, you'll see that later in this list, but it's one of those roller coasters which I think it doesn't do anything in a spectacularly amazing way, but Takabisha does almost every single thing that you can ever expect from a roller coaster, and it does them all super well. You've got that amazing Gerstlauer inside barrel roll at the start of the ride. You've got a launch, you've got a vertical lift hill and a beyond vertical drop, which at the time that I'm recording this is still the steepest drop in the world. You've got so many elements in this thing, and just everything is right about it. The pacing is right, I feel. It's got some decent airtime, but it's also got some great hang time in some of the elements. It's got a fucking banana roll, for Christ's sake, which is one of my favorite elements. That is just so disorienting, and it's just an all-around awesome ride. There's nothing that really stands out about it, but there's also nothing that's really flawed about it. It doesn't really so much feel like it has a Gerst ache inducing unsmoothness either. It's a pretty smooth ride. The only thing that I feel I could detract from it is the fact that it doesn't have lap bars, but then again, the over-the-shoulder restraints don't so much detract from the experience because it's a pretty smooth ride, I would say. So yeah, Takabisha is absolutely awesome. Big shout out also to the view of Mount Fuji. You don't really notice this so much on many of the POVs of Takabisha, but it's got an absolutely amazing view of Mount Fuji, and definitely one of the best views on any roller coaster that I've been on. So number 8 is Kärnan, which is my highest rated cursed roller coaster. Now, roller coaster wise, I would not rate this above Takabisha. I think it doesn't quite so much have that much to offer, and it has a bit more rattle. This thing honestly has more rattle than I was expecting, and I wrote this 1 year or 2 years after it opened, but it's also a lot rattly already, which is a bit of a shame, because otherwise it is absolutely awesome. The indoor part is great. I'm not going to spoil anything about this in case you're gonna ride this in the near future and you don't know what's happening on the indoors part. Don't look it up because it's absolutely awesome. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's great. It's one of the most immersive experiences I've ever had. I will have to say one little spoiler about the inside part, which is the sort of seat roulette that they've got. You don't get to choose your seats, but they've got a really awesome immersive themed experience where you stand in a circle and there's these lights that go around that stop at somebody at random, and then you're assigned to your seat. And it made me so much more nervous when I was about to ride this roller coaster, because they made such a big deal theming wise about this roller coaster. And this is honestly one of the very few rides where, even though I already had a lot of experience with much more intense roller coasters before this, I was still scared shitless because stuff happens on the indoor parts that is absolutely crazy. One thing that I can say though is the lift hill is straight up a vertical lift hill, but to the height of a hypercoaster. This is a hypercoaster and you're only held in there with lap bars, and it's a vertical lift hill. The only thing between you and certain death is that tiny little chair behind you, and I made the mistake of looking behind me at the top of the lift hill. It's absolutely scary. You look into a 60-meter deep black hole with nothing to keep you in your seat but a lap bar. It's awesome. And then you go down that first drop, which is really quite forceful. An amazing first drop, definitely one of my favorite first drops ever. Seems to be a little bit like Expedition G-Force, even though I've never been on that. It's that same sort of steep drop with a twist in it. And then you go into the non-inverting loop element, which is the only really tall part of the ride, which is also just really great elements, quite smooth and amazing forces on that. And then you just have these meandering curves throughout the landscape, with special mention for that one airtime hill in the middle of the ride. If you've seen a POV of this, you know which hill I'm talking about. It's crazy, it's insane. That thing moves in real time. If you're off-ride, you can see the track bending back and forth once a car has been over it. And finally there's that interesting indoor barrel roll part, which brings you back into the station, which is also a lot of fun. So yeah, overall great experience, and because of the experience and the theming, I would put this slightly above Takabisha. But did Takabisha have the same theming as Kärnan has? I would have preferred that. So it's really just kind of down to how much you enjoy which part. So moving on, I have got Twisted Colossus at number 7, and boy, this is my only RMC. It was my first RMC, obviously, and it did not let down, although I also had to say it wasn't better than I expected. My expectations were super high, but this ride is just great. It's the only thing that I can detract from it. I don't know why I'm starting with the negative part again, is that maybe it's a little bit too violent for my personal taste. The airtime is absolutely amazing and unlike anything that I've expected, and I can definitely see why this is the RMC-ness that makes RMC so popular. But for me personally, it's a little bit too violent in that it's a tiny bit uncomfortable, but even still, it's absolutely great. The elements are amazing. The way that you just fly off your seat with every single airtime hill super violently is awesome. The fact that it's kind of 2 rides for 1, because you do the ride once and then you come back to the same lift hill, wait for another train to duel, and then go down again, which most of the time you are kind of dueling, and yes, they do let one train go a little bit earlier than the other, which, you know, is bound to happen, but it's still awesome to just have these 2 trains going at the same time and basically get 2 rides at the same time. I have to give a huge shout out to that awesome Top Gun style, which is an amazing element, high up there with my favorite elements, hanging upside down for such a long time, looking down at another train underneath you. Is just a crazy experience. And once again, just all the airtime on that ride is so violent and so awesome. The only thing that I really kind of dislike about it is those restraints, where you're restrained by your legs and in other ways, which is not as comfortable, I feel, as a Intamin Mega Coaster. So, speaking of Intamin Mega Coasters, my number 6 is Kawasemi, and this kind of uncomfortableness is really the only reason that for me Kawasemi is higher than Twisted Colossus, because even though it's less intense, I feel it's more comfortable, and it's more of a layback, enjoy the ride kind of experience, which it definitely was for me. This thing is so small and yet so powerful. It's really awesome. When I was there was pretty much nobody else, so every ride I took, I was basically just me and some other Japanese dude in there. But even with that sort of empty train, in the afternoon it was noticeably violent. In the morning it was definitely a bit quieter and the airtime was a bit more floaty. But once it warmed up, it was definitely ejector all the way through. And this is possibly just the most perfect roller coaster layout that has ever been made. Even though it's not the best ride, it just does so much in so little space with so little height and so little speed that it's amazingly efficient. I do not think you could theoretically get any more out of that ride than it is. It is pretty much perfect considering the stats. You go down that first drop into a very forceful first hill, or first curve, and then into the first hill, which is kind of twisted, and it's not the best hill of the ride. I think the best straight camelback comes after that, when you have that first regular kind of camelback, and then into another curve, into these two twisted airtime hills, which are so much better than I ever expected them to be. This thing, I don't think that the POVs do this thing justice, especially on the twisted airtime hills. You are really getting flown out of your seat in a way that you don't see on the POV videos. It is absolutely awesome, regardless of whether you're in front or back. I don't think it makes that much difference since the trains are so short anyway. Just awesome airtime hill all around. And there you go into those three smaller airtime hills toward the end, which is still lots of fun. They're really small hills, but they really eject you out of your seat. And then it's just one big curve flying back to the station where nobody's in line and you could just turn around, go in line again, and do it another time with one other dude. So yeah, that was an absolutely awesome experience. So number 5 for me is Flying Dinosaur at Universal Studios Japan, which is just my favorite B&M flying coaster. I've only been on 2, but probably 2 of the ones that usually get compared as some of the best in the world. And honestly, I don't see why there's any comparison between Tatsu and Flying Dinosaur, which is also interesting because one is like an American roller coaster with a Japanese name and the other is a Japanese name roller coaster with an English name. But yeah, Flying Dinosaur is so much better in my opinion. It's way more violent. It's got that violence of the pretzel loop, but much more spread out throughout the entire layout. And yeah, there are some insane forces on the pretzel loop, but also on some of the other elements. It's got an amazing pacing throughout the entire ride, and just, it never lets down until you're in the brake run. It's never too intense that it's uncomfortable, which I do think the bottom of the pretzel loop of Tatsu is borderline uncomfortable, but it also doesn't have any parts which just kind of feel like you're flying in a meandering, boring kind of way, which I think Tatsu does for most of its layout. This thing is just powerful all along the way. And one thing that definitely ups it for me as well is that it looks great. It's got an amazing skyline from across the lake, and you can basically see it throughout the entire park. And the theming is just awesome. You fly through this whole sort of tropical forest, lots of Jurassic Park theming, and even a little bit of interactiveness with the paths and the Jurassic Park the ride. So yeah, definitely a whole awesome experience, and that whole themed area is beautiful. So there you go, that's Flying Dinosaur. And number 4 for me is Goliath in Walibi, the Netherlands, because god damn it, there are way too many Goliaths. And this is the best Goliath, I think. I haven't been on any of the other ones, but I cannot imagine the other ones being better than this one. It is just, for me personally, the perfect ride also for what it does. Kind of like Kawasemi, but a little bit bigger and a little bit different, where Kawasemi has that sort of twisted first hill. Goliath has that stangle dive, which is absolutely awesome. Goliath has very similar sort of helixes with some power in them when compared to Kawasemi, but I think Goliath's helixes are more powerful. The twisted airtime doesn't so much exist, which is the one thing that I do kind of miss on Goliath. I think the middle section of the ride is not as great as the start and the end, but god damn it does the end fucking make up for that, because those final airtime hills are just like Kawasemi's final airtime hills, except bigger and better, I feel. And the final curve into the station of Goliath might as well be its best moment, even though it's not airtime, even though it's not what you're riding the ride for perhaps. It is so forceful, and every time you ride it you just feel like you're gonna launch into the station. Like there's barely any space for the brake run to actually slow you down before you get into the station. That final turn just hits it with full speed, but it's such a small compact turn that you get some crazy forces on that. So Goliath, absolutely awesome. I much preferred the older color scheme, but hey, who cares about a color scheme when you're riding an amazing Intamin Mega Coaster? So yeah, actually that is my highest rated Intamin Mega Coaster for the time being. Until perhaps maybe Expedition GeForce kicks it off the list, but we'll see about that later in life. In any case, my number 3 at the moment is X2 in Six Flags Magic Mountain. I mean, there's not really a different X2 in the world, is there? X2 is just great. I know it's a super polarizing coaster, as these Aero 4D coasters are, but I think personally it's awesome. X2 is a little bit shaky for sure, it can be a little bit uncomfortable, but if you're on the inside, regardless of whether you're in the first or the last car on the train, they're wholly different experiences, but I think they're both awesome. I just love the way that these 4D Aero coasters, or 4D SNS coasters, whatever you want to call it, are just throwing you around. It's an experience unlike any other roller coaster, really intense and really cool, and some of those moments you just kind of feel like it really wants to throw you out of the ride. So X2 is definitely one of my favorites. First drop in the last car, or the first car, I have to say, is extra awesome because you really hang in that weird seat on a pretty good height for quite a few seconds. The Raven turns are great, and I like the light to fly elements as well. It's just an overall really great ride. But I have to say, as much as I believe that X2 soundtrack does make it a little bit of a cooler ride than it would be without that soundtrack, and the general surrounding of it is pretty nice, it's not my favorite 4D coaster. That has to go to Eejanaika, which roller coaster wise, if we were to disregard anything but the roller coaster experience itself, is by far my number 1. I've always seen so many people compare X2 and Eejanaika and kind of go like, which one is better? You know, they look very similar. I honestly don't think there's any competition. I think Eejanaika is easily the way better ride. It's overall smoother, it's taller, it's faster, it's more intense. Yes, but it's also got some slightly different elements and very small changes which I think overall add up to a much better ride. Most notably, that where X2 has a regular hill where you just kind of flip the seats, Eejanaika has a 0G roll where both the seat inverts and the track itself inverts on completely different axes. So it's got this really weird inversion where your seat just kind of goes everywhere in a weird 3D way and you completely lose orientation, and it is violent as heck. It really throws you out of the seats, and it is intense and awesome and definitely one of my favorite elements, and it feels like that element is what the 4D coaster was invented for, and the fact that X2 lacks that element for me is a bit of a drawback. Also, Eejanaika has a really kind of overbanked turn in the place where X2 has a very boring kind of slow turn, and where in X2 it's a bit of a pause in the ride. In Eejanaika, it is the one place in the ride where you can kind of almost catch your breath, but it still really flips you almost upside down and rotates the seats quite a bit to still make it a really cool overbanked turn experience. Where in X2 you're just kind of lying and it's doing a bit of a gliding turn, so I think that's quite a difference as well. And yeah, you do definitely notice the height difference in person as well. Eejanaika is absolutely huge, with 76 meters tall, being more than just a hyper coaster, and X2 is way under that, and the height difference is noticeable in real life. Eejanaika is impressively large and scary looking, and X2 is almost cute in comparison, so honestly, Eejanaika way wins that battle. The only problem with Eejanaika is its abysmal queue time, but I don't want to put that into the rating of the roller coaster itself. It is absolutely awesome, and without question, I think the better 4D coaster. Now, finally, my number 1, it's Taron. Yeah, and I know this is going to be really controversial, but Taron is my favorite roller coaster, primarily because it's got that theming. And at the end of the day, I more or less got into the roller coaster enthusiast community because I was interested in theme parks and theming and architecture in the first place. And Taron, honestly, is just my wet dream ride. The ride itself is intense, way more intense than the POV would let you believe, but I do think that the star of the ride is the whole themed area around it. There is no roller coaster anywhere where you've got this much heavy immersive theming. You've got that amazing alpine village, and the roller coaster just makes it way above all the paths, across itself, twisting in and out of itself so many times, going through buildings, tunnels, rock facades. It is just an awesome journey through this whole fantasy alpine village, and there is nothing that quite compares to that experience. And for me, it is the roller coaster that I have the most fun of. It's not the most intense roller coaster, it's not the best when it comes to layout, but for me, I just have so much fun riding this ride, because I feel this is the only roller coaster where the word immersion is actually, honestly, legitimized. I think overall, the whole idea of immersiveness is more of a buzzword than anything. It just kind of gets applied anywhere to make something seem more properly themed. But Taron, I think, is the only real properly themed roller coaster, because instead of just a themed station, the whole ride is just themed. You never leave this awesome alpine village theming, and the way it interacts with that theming and interacts with the paths, the way that it's just as awesome to look at from an off-ride perspective than it is to ride it yourself. The way that the launches are sort of nestled in the bottom of this whole pit that the alpine village is built in, and the sound that they make, and especially how forceful the second launch is absolutely awesome. So this is my number one, because that whole experience is just, there's nothing that quite compares to it. Sure, you've got Black Mamba in the same park, but it's a way less forceful roller coaster, less themed, more of a short ride, and overall Taron is just the best ride that I've ever been on, in my personal experience. Without that whole theming around it, it wouldn't even make my top 10, to be very honest. I think it is better than the POVs make you believe. It is quite forceful, it has some good positive G-forces and some amazing airtime, and the launches are great. And that's coming from somebody who's been on Do-dodonpa. But it's the theming which really brings this to another level. And most of all, I just hope we see more Tarons in this world. Because sure, we've got some amazing hyper coasters and stuff like that anywhere, and we can endlessly describe all the little differences in airtime and positive G-forces, and how it is in the morning versus how it is in the afternoon, and how it is with a full train versus how it is in an empty train, or warm weather and cold weather. But in the end, I think we're not quite at a point where we have enough rides like Taron, something which is both an extreme thrill ride while also appealing to the whole theming and narrative things that make dark rides so awesome. Just, it is my personal favorite because I have the most fond memories of this roller coaster. I think it's the most fun roller coaster to ride, and I just wish there were more like this. So yeah, that is my top 10. And, well, I wonder if you agree with my top 10. At least I hope it's consistent. I know that these things are always really different across different people, but I feel as long as you've got a good basis to kind of compare different coasters on a relative level, then a top 10 can make sense with whatever is really highly rated. So honestly, I'm open to anything. This is just my whole idea of what an amazing roller coaster is. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you in whatever next video I'm gonna make. Bye guys!